Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Learn to Love podcast, your guide to everything love, sex, intimacy, and relationships. Each week, your host, Zach Beach, interviews new experts on love, including couples therapists, relationship coaches, sex educators, and best-selling authors. Learn the best tips and cutting-edge wisdom to better love yourself, others, and the world. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, beautiful souls. I'm so positively delighted that you could join us on the Learn to Love podcast. I am your host, Zach Beach, and for today's episode, we have the incredible Shelly Tygielski. Shelly is the founder of the global grassroots mutual aid organization, Pandemic of Love, and the co-founder of Partners in Kind, a purpose in production equity fund that invests in social impact and entertainment projects. Her work as a self-care activist, community organizer, and mindfulness teacher has been featured by over 100 media outlets, including CNN Heroes, The Kelly Clarkson Show, CBS This Morning, The New York Times, and The Washington Post. A trauma-informed mindfulness teacher and a former Garrison Institute fellow, she has been called one of the 12 powerful women of the mindfulness movement by mindful.org. She came onto the show to talk about her book, Sit Down to Rise Up, How Radical Self-Care Can Change the World. And it was such a wonderful and refreshing perspective to hear that our self-care is selfless. In order to change the world, we must begin by changing ourselves. In order to be of service to the world, we must make sure our own batteries are charged. So we save ourselves to save the world. Without further ado, let's begin. Hello, Shelly. Welcome to the Learn to Love podcast. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you, Zach, for having me. I'm really appreciative of the fact that you've been so flexible with me, given all of the challenges we've had scheduling this call.
Yes, for our listeners who don't know, Shelly was living in Asheville, now is currently in Tahoe. Now, do you still have a home in Asheville to return to?
Yes. Fortunately, our home was not physically impacted, unlike many, many other individuals who are in Asheville and the surrounding communities. But we are so happy and proud to be living in such a wonderful community that is filled with so much love and kindness and compassion and awareness and togetherness. People really have restored, people's, I think, faith in humanity by just coming together and realizing that we can save each other. And it's been beautiful to witness. So, but we live in Lake Tahoe, North Lake Tahoe, which is also equally beautiful during the winter months for ski season. We're actually snowboarders and we love to snowboard. And so we come out here from December to May every year and then head back to Asheville for summer and fall.
Yeah, I love that Fred Rogers quote, always look for the helpers. When you see a crisis or find a crisis, you will find all humans coming together to help out each other.
Yeah, I love that quote too. And, use it often, but I also like to challenge people to be the helper as well, because I think that people sometimes don't necessarily feel empowered or qualified or, like they have the wherewithal to be able to also be the helper. So I would say look for the helpers, but maybe join forces with the helpers and be the helper as well, because what we can accomplish together as helpers is remarkable.
Yes, be the help you want to see in the world.
Totally.
So I'd love to begin with just a fairly silly question. So as a self-care activist, community organizer, and mindfulness teacher, what's a typical day like for you?
That answer really depends on what coast I'm on. When I'm here in Lake Tahoe, I try to be outdoors, either snowboarding or cross-country skiing, at least, 3, 4, 5 times a week, if I can, for a couple of hours at a time. And obviously during the spring months, go hiking and just enjoy the outdoors and the fresh air here, which is incredible. But a typical day for me is, like many Americans, especially people who work remotely, is spent, unfortunately, in front of a screen, which is why I try to get away from the screen as much as possible and make sure that I remind myself to create these, little vignettes, these pockets where I can recalibrate, where I can reconnect with myself, where I can really ask myself, what do I need in this moment? And I think oftentimes I'm so worried about what everybody else around me thinks, whether they're physically present, whether it's children or partners or other family members or friends or even coworkers, and I oftentimes have to really work hard to remind myself, even as somebody who's a practitioner of doing that often, it's so easy to fall back into old patterns of being a caretaker, of being somebody who, needs to be needed, if you will, right? It's easy to fall back into those default modes. So I remind myself often to take those kind of beats throughout the day and do something for myself, whether it's physical. I have a friend named Susan Kraft in Asheville. She's a wonderful yoga teacher, and she taught me the term yoga snacks. And she said, during the day, make sure that you take some yoga snacks. And I'm like, what does that mean? And she said, well,
kale chips.
Yeah, no, like you don't have to. Yeah. Well, not actual snacks that you ingest, but really like she was like, like you don't have to, even if you don't have like 45 minutes or an hour to practice like a full yoga class, in between calls, you can just do a pose and focus specifically on, just stretching and kind of getting in these little snacks throughout the day. So things like that really feed my soul. And my anchor, which I talk often about in my book, really came from, my core teachers, Sharon Salzberg, and my friend David G, who taught me the term RPM, which is really funny. It stands for Rise, P, Meditate. And so he's like, that's what you need to do every morning. It's your non-negotiable.
Pause, rise, pause, meditate. What's the P?
P, as in
like
P-E,
literally
like
P.
He's the best. If you don't know David G, he's definitely somebody that you need to follow. He's a Hay House author, and he's been teaching mindfulness and meditation for a really long time. But he's he's just so quirky and funny and practical. And so I just remember him telling me that years ago, and I was like, that's so practical. And it's so true, because I think if you get up to get coffee, or if you get up to like do anything else, you get distracted. If you look at your phone, if you, just start engaging in the day, you sort of start to not remember that, this is the foundation that you need to build the rest of your day upon. So my days normally look very different from each other, depending on which coast I'm on, depending whether I'm traveling and what projects I'm working on at the time, because the types of projects I work on are very different as well. But they're always, always anchored in self-care practices in very sort of small ways. And then also in my mindfulness practice, which is everything, the foundation of kind of everything that I build upon.
I love so much of what you're saying. I mean, just your life is your message, that you have lots of projects, lots of different things going on in your life, and you still find that time to be out in nature, to take care of yourself. And I love this idea of pausing throughout the day. And I think it ties into how a lot of people feel. A lot of people, I feel like, struggle with having a daily meditation practice, with carving out 30 minutes a day from their busy lives. And for those people who don't find the 30 minutes a day, finding the 2 seconds of enjoying your tea, finding the 5 minutes to breathe while you're waiting in line for the bus. Like, we can practice everyday mindfulness of slowing down throughout the day and just enjoying whatever we're doing.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. I think that 30 minutes is a lot, by the way, Zach. I don't know that I find 30 minutes every day to meditate. I think, scientifically, we're told by practitioners and researchers like Dr. Amishi Jha that 12 minutes is a really great sweet spot. She's a neuroscientist who has been studying the human brain and trying to figure out, and working with the U.S. Army and a bunch of other institutions to sort of figure out where is this attention-based, practice most helpful for us and the busyness that we experience on a daily basis in our culture and in our society, because of all the white noise and all the things that are trying to grab our attention on a daily basis. So I would say that, kind of making it this like non-negotiable practice in the morning Once you get into a habit of just RPM, you basically feel almost like naked walking out of the house or dealing with other human beings, because you feel like, if you didn't brush your teeth and you would go out of the house, you'd be like, oh my God, I forgot to brush my teeth, or, oh, I forgot to put pants on, or, and in a way, I kind of feel like if I don't have this core practice, I am, not the best version of myself that's showing up, or the best version of myself that day. Right? Because the best version of me changes from a day-to-day basis, like most people.
Yeah, I love the tiny habits that really change our lives. I also really resonate with leaving your phone plugged in the morning. Like, it's really easy to have our phone be our alarm, to pick it up, turn it off, and then immediately open it up.
Yeah.
But put it away, get up, drink a glass of water, and enjoy it. And we can think of this practice as mental hygiene, because we're always so focused on physical hygiene, but we have to also clear the
Love
mind.
That. Yep. 100%.
So before we started recording, you were talking about a new project of yours called Partners in Kind that you started last year. Tell our listeners about that.
Well, Partners in Kind actually launched, kind of soft launched in November of 2022. My partner, Jillian Hormel, and I had been working together on different philanthropic pursuits and projects, including Pandemic of Love, which she sat on the board of. And she and I really enjoyed working together. And one of the frustrations that she expressed to me, and that I started to notice in the space that she is in on a daily basis, which is film production and television production, is the lack of social impact and entertainment projects that get made. And, the kind of system right now is also, I think, in a correction mode, I would say, in terms of streamers and networks and, studios, et cetera. The old studio model and even the streamer model is completely different today. And in terms of what types of projects get funded, I'm sure you could turn on your television, your Netflix, your Hulu, et cetera. And for the most part, other than maybe a handful of programs that you're watching specifically or streaming, I mean, at least I find myself looking at, the list of what's new. And I think to myself, how did this ever get funded or greenlit? Like, who's watching this stuff, right? And obviously people are, though, because I think, we have been, even through the advent of social media, sort of conditioned to have shock and awe and level up constantly in terms of, the types of things that are being thrown at us to consume. And I think as consumers, we haven't done a really great job of demanding the content that we're viewing, or the content that gets produced for us to view, to mirror the world that we say that we want to be living in and that we want to see. And so we started to, go down this path of speaking to production companies, speaking to documentary producers, different types of studios, other social impact and entertainment companies, whether they're nonprofit or for-profit, and even foundations, to find out, okay, why is the system broken? What's going on? Other than the fact that you need money to produce these types of projects, what else is the issue? And the issue is that even if projects get produced, sometimes they just don't get seen. It's like a tree fell in the forest, So Jillian and I started Partners in Kind, and we officially launched kind of publicly in October of 2023 with the announcement of a $50 million Purpose in Production Fund. And the goal of that fund was to provide development dollars and finishing funds and all sorts of, different funding for projects in all different categories: film, television, podcasts, theater, to basically fund projects that are at their core looking to make a social impact, looking to create cultural shifts, looking to shift behavior, looking to potentially even shift policy over time. And there's so many different types of projects that I think you and I can think about instantaneously, and the listeners could probably name a few too, projects that when we were growing up, that we were watching, and maybe we didn't realize that those types of shows had social impact, messages, whether depending on the generation people grew up in, but like everything from All in the Family and the types of conversations that people were having then. I'll use the Cosby Show as an example, even though I know, like, let's just separate Bill Cosby for a minute from the Cosby Show. But like, I think that it was really important at that time for Americans to see, a successful upper middle class Black family. Many Americans, especially in rural areas, maybe did not have that necessarily, like, that experience, right? And just speaking to people who that really fed their soul. Obviously, what spawned from that, A Different World, was like also a really important show at the time. And today, most recently, a show like Modern Family, for example, which normalized watching, a gay couple raise a child and have a relationship, and people who love each other but are generations apart from each other are married and have a successful marriage. And so, these types of social impact and entertainment projects don't always have to be like a documentary about mental health. It could also be these types of projects that are very much, in fact, entertaining, that leave you thinking and that leave you sort of open to maybe approaching something completely different, something that is unknown or that you personally did not have proximity or experience with. And now you're like, oh, okay, that's an interesting way to think about this thing. So that I was afraid of, or that I didn't know much about, or I had no one to talk to, or I didn't have access to this, subject matter. And so it's really interesting to sort of track how those types of projects in whatever platform they are, actually can contribute to that culture shift. So that's what Partners in Kind is. We have a bunch of projects right now that we're working on. Many are listed on our website. Many are not yet and haven't been announced, but we have a couple I could share with you really quickly. Is in the theater space. We have a project called Phenomenal Woman Maya Angelou, and we're working with Maya Angelou's the late Dr. Maya Angelou's family and estate and foundation to tell her story on Broadway, which we're very excited about.
Okay.
We are working on a project called Alpha Gang, which the Zellner brothers, who recently did Sasquatch Sunset, which was like a Sundance darling last year. And we're co-executive producing with Kate Blanchett, you may have heard of her, to produce a sci-fi movie that is a satirical comedy about what makes us human, called Alpha Gang. And that's starting to film in February. And we're working on an incredible unscripted television show called Take 21 with Monument Productions and the Hess family, who gave us Nacho Libre and Napoleon Dynamite and other classic films, to produce a television show with neurodivergent young adults who are very interested in the arts, and we're following their progress as they're creating their first film.
Wow. I love this idea and I love this project, and I resonate with it a lot because this is a struggle I've also found. Like, I love love and I just want to talk about love and learn about love and watch things about love all the time. And love covers all aspects of the human experience. I love learning about the Bodhisattva path and love for all beings. I love learning about mysticism and love of the divine and love of God. And I like getting into indigenous shamanism, learning about love for the earth and Pachamama. And then I go to Netflix or I go to Amazon. I'm like, all right, time to find a show on this.
Right.
And then I'm like, and then I'm okay, well, this is just entertainment. Let me go to the documentary section. And it's like, true crime or Lance Armstrong, like doping scandal. And I'm like, there's nothing.
Right.
There's
so
nothing
you're watching
that I feel
the
like
Hallmark Channel, basically,
is going to. There's nothing I feel like out there that really enriches the heart. I mean, there's some things, but there's a need for more things that enrich the heart, that help to evolve our consciousness to be more loving.
Totally. I think that, when we can see a reflection of ourselves in these types of projects, it can really be a part of what helps to wake us up, which is really important. I watched this really great video that Martha Beck, and I would encourage anybody to go out and just go to her Instagram. I'm sure it's posted elsewhere too, but she recently put out a video. It's probably 6 or 7 minutes long, but it's well worth the watch because in front of her, the way you'll identify the video is she's got these sugar cubes that are all stacked up in a pyramid. And she's essentially talking about how we need to prepare not for another revolution, because they always result in the same systems, these pyramid systems that we are so used to living in, since the beginning of time, since the beginning of like structured civilization and empires, etc. And instead, we need to prepare for dissolution. And so she kind of walks through this beautiful explanation of what that means. But essentially, it's really tied to in each individual's awakening and enlightenment. And she uses those terms, but she's like, look, those terms come from, Eastern philosophy and like Zen Buddhism, et cetera, et cetera. But like in every single part of history and in every culture, there are different types of terminology for these types of awakening, if you will. And I think she is completely on point with that. And so our hope for Partners in Kind is that we help to contribute to individual awakenings and aha moments and moments where we can pierce people's heart and wake them up from a collective trance and show them what is possible in terms of the world that we could be living in if we were willing to be brave enough to step out of that trance and connect in a loving way with people that are around us and that can be part of our community.
I love that. Create moments that pierce people's hearts and wake them up from a collective trance. So I think we have to head into today's topic. We're already halfway through. So our topic for today is radical self-care, based around your book, Sit Down to Rise Up. And I think we're all inundated with messages around what self-care is, what it looks like, and I'm curious your approach.
Sure. So I use the term self-care, but I use the term very loosely. Like if I had my druthers and my publisher would let me, I would have not called it self-care. Would have called it communal care. But I don't know that people are completely aware of what that means, right? Self-care, I think, is a misnomer because it makes it seem like the pursuit of self-care is individualistic entirely. And it really isn't. Self-care has to be something that is communal in nature. In order for us to be able to really tend to ourselves, and even again in today's busyness culture, as we talked about earlier, Zach, like I remember being a single mom, and having a toddler son, and if somebody would tell me to take care of myself or to engage in self-care, it almost felt like an insult, because I was like, really? Like, when am I supposed to actually do that? Like, am I supposed to wake up at like 4 a.m. instead of 5 a.m? With everything going on, working a full-time job, being a single mom, juggling all these other pursuits, etc. And so it was only when I actually was able to lean on community, learn to ask for the help that I needed. And then in return, when I was finally not just treading water, but like above water, able to return the favor and create true community for myself, was I able to really consistently engage in self-care. So even my practice, right, my RPM practice, I don't think would have been possible. I mean, my son is now out, doesn't live with us anymore. He's 22 years old. But like thinking about the gratitude and appreciation that I have for my husband now, my partner for the last almost 20 years, who has been able to without him, I wouldn't have been able to carve out that 5-10 minutes in the morning before the morning rush started, getting ready for school, making sure you have your backpack, making lunches, getting in the car, getting dressed to go to work. I think we need to learn to ask for what we need, which is really hard sometimes, especially if you're teetering on burnout or really tired and overwhelmed and you're like, I don't even know what I need. And the reality is that when I first started down this pursuit of quote unquote self-care, I didn't know what I needed. I was super overwhelmed, but I knew that I needed help. And so it was with, the courage to sort of lean in and speak to my girlfriends collectively to help me weave that safety net that I needed to be able to buy time for myself right? These little pockets of time to be able to take a yoga class once a week, not have to make dinner once a week because somebody would bring like a tray of lasagna over. Have the time to really, just focus on myself too, so that I could be a better mother, a better, friend, a better citizen of the world, if you will, was really important. So for me, self-care really does mean communal care, because I do not think that becoming an isolationist and just going off solely on a retreat for 364 days a year to emerge one day a year is the right path for 99.9% of people living in the real world.
I think it's really hard because we do live in an individualistic culture that does say like you're supposed to, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and be on your own and be independent. And there's a lot of vulnerability in feeling like you need to depend on others.
Yeah. Well, I think, to lean on historically what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had said, it's really not about pulling yourself up from your bootstraps. Like that whole way of thinking is completely wrong, and especially in today's culture where so many people are suffering because they don't even have boots on their feet in the first place. And so it's like when I was saying to you, it was almost like an insult when people would just say like, oh, take care of yourself. Like, oh, gee, thanks. What does that even mean? Like, take care of yourself. Like, we're all doing the best that we can do. I think what we need to be committed to doing, if we really want to take care of ourselves, is to, and this is a Buddhist quote a proverb that I love so much and I use often in my work, but really as a mantra that steers my life, is tend to the area of the garden that you can reach. That we each need to tend to the area of the garden that we can reach. And what that means is that if we only did that, if we only made sure that the people that were within our garden, within our reach, within our inner circle were okay, I mean, really okay, and we made it a habit to lift others and in turn then lift ourselves, make sure that everybody had that pair of proverbial boots that we're talking about, right? And that their boots were not only like had fresh soles, but also had great shoelaces and were shined up, to complete the metaphor, that we could actually shift what society and what it means to have community and what it means to be able to not just pull yourselves up by your bootstraps, but really pull everybody else up that's sort of in that inner circle of yours and in your garden.
I love that. Tend to the area of the garden that you can reach. And I'm wondering how you do see this role of mindfulness and awareness and practice and sitting down before the rising up, or perhaps these are reciprocal, kind of working together.
Yeah.
Because, you were mentioned like, oh, I don't know what I want. I don't know what I need. And this is my experience a lot. I even had a client the other day that was like, oh, I'm just so overwhelmed. And I'm like, what are you feeling? And they're like, I don't know. Or we mask it. Fine. Good.
Yeah.
What are you needing? I don't know. Well, what you're unhappy in your relationship. What do you want more of from your partner? I don't know. Like people, I do feel like they're kind of burnt out, lost, exhausted, but also unaware of their true wants and needs.
Yeah. Well, I think that's also a problem of, just having the right language or access to language or access to safe spaces to be able to really lean into and explore what it is that we need, and I think it's really interesting that in the society that we live in, like that we have to know what we need because we're so uncomfortable being in liminal spaces and like trusting that if we just sort of like lean in and are present with even the unknown for a little bit, that we will emerge, because, and so it goes back to that masking that you were saying, like, it's just about, I have to know, so I'm going to label something, even if it's the wrong label, at least it's the label, right? One of the practices that a co-author of mine, Justin Michael Williams, who's also a really wonderful meditation teacher, and we co-wrote a book together as well. One of the practices that we often teach when we do teach together is the emotions wheel, and giving people, the access to words and the language to be able to self-identify, or at least get close to self-identifying what it is that they're feeling really? Because oftentimes somebody will, like you said, say, well, I'm really tired, but like, are you really tired? Or yes, also, like that's a byproduct of what? And so, sort of being able to provide people with access to the language to be able to describe what they're feeling and the safe space in which to do it is incredibly important. And that goes back in turn to the need for community to be able to do that. That's really the salve, I think, that's going to treat the wounds of this individualistic society that really is highly perpetuated by capitalism that we are living in. And it's really hard, of course, to avoid living in that reality. We live in the real world, most of us do anyway. Like I have a friend that, lives in a commune now and like it's a whole different experience, but most of us can't do that, And so I think it really goes back to, thinking of this safety net and this tapestry that we want to weave, whether it's our core kind of family members or whether it expands to people in our neighborhood or people that, we are friends with. But the reality is that when you are able to weave that fabric, if you're feeling down or overwhelmed, inevitably there's somebody in that kind of circle of influence of yours that is maybe on the upswing and things sort of start to, normalize. It's like this beautiful, wave, this beautiful fabric that just sort of is really responsive. It's like our nervous systems. And so I just go back to, I think when people say like, I don't even know what I need, my kind of prompt for them or where I usually dig in with people who tell me that is, tell me about your community. Like who are the people that are within your circle of inner circle, your circle of influence, the people that you meet with and talk to that feed your soul on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. And oftentimes you'll find that the people who are feeling that level of overwhelm are people who have self-isolated or don't have that type of community. And so I think what I can offer to people is, that I can understand that, especially if you're living in a big city or you work many, many hours a week, or you're a single parent, who works many, many hours a week, or you're a caregiver because you have aging parents. All of these, different things that you're dealing with, I would say, that the space where you feel the most overwhelmed by or the most vulnerable, find others who are feeling the same thing and form that community. Because one, you'll realize you're not alone in that feeling. And two, you'll be able to lift each other and provide each other with best practices and tips and offerings of love and support and help.
Yeah, a lovely image is coming up just listening to you is almost like we all have our candle that's lit and sometimes our candle goes out, but that's a great thing. As long as somebody else's candle is lit, we can relight ours. And then when theirs goes out, we can light theirs, and just how we have mutual support for each other. And a community is a wonderful way to not feel alone in today's separated and isolated society.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I also liked how you mentioned that we can be comfortable with the unknown. And I think to me, that's such an important part of spiritual practice is embracing uncertainty and embracing the mystery.
Yeah.
And I like this line from your book, which goes, we need to have the courage to remind ourselves that good is good enough and that good enough is better than perfect. So how is good enough better than perfect?
Well, I think that as somebody who's always been, a type A personality, perfectionist / people pleaser, it's really so daunting and so heavy to constantly strive for what perfection is. And I think what we think is perfection is oftentimes based on the need for validation, right? Validation from others. And when we can, let go of that, we can be okay with good being good enough and understanding that not everything has to be, and most things won't be, to that level of excellence, and for most of us, if we can achieve one thing in our lifetime that is that level of excellence, what would that thing be? And I think the most perfect thing that can be is, leaning into your, entire, being, in terms of what this podcast is even about, right? Which is love. I think the thing that we could be the most perfect at is, how we love others, how we love ourselves. And so what's more perfect than that? If we did that right, my friend, Jen Pasteloff, who's an author, says, when I have reached the end of my life and somebody asks me, what have you done? My answer is going to be, I've done love.
I love that. I really think that's a really key distinction, that often our desire for perfection stems from a desire to be seen as perfect and therefore be accepted and loved by others. And it stems from an underlying fear that if we were to be imperfect, if we were to reveal our wounds and our fears and our insecurities, we would experience the judgment and shame and even social exclusion from the group that we need so desperately.
Yeah. But on the flip side, what I will say, and I can say this from personal experience, is that when we are willing to be vulnerable enough to reveal that, oftentimes the exact opposite happens. Even if the people that you think you need validation from fall away, other people find you who are your people.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering if this ties into your idea that self-care, which we now see as communal care and asking for what we want from community, forming community. You write that self-care is selfless. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that oftentimes we think that, taking time for ourselves, again, this leans back on just society and the culture that has been perpetuated, that like we got to constantly be on the go. And that if we take a moment to even, do nothing, which is something, actually, doing nothing is something. It's selfish of us. We have, and especially I will say, if you're a caregiver, if you're a parent, if you're somebody that takes care of others, you feel almost guilty of taking time for yourself and putting that proverbial overused, metaphor of your oxygen mask on first before attending to others. But we know this without a shadow of a doubt, scientifically. Research has proven, the World Health Organization has identified burnout now as an actual disease, that is plaguing many of us. And so we know that if we don't do that we're not going to be able to continue to show up for others. So we have to show up for ourselves first. And so, the pursuit of self-care absolutely is not just something that is nice, not just something that has in today's society been co-opted by, retail brands who are trying to sell you on things. Self-care doesn't cost money. Self-care doesn't cost any money. I will say that again. Can things that cost money also offer self-care? Sure. Yes. But self-care ultimately is really about putting that oxygen mask on first for yourself. And if you don't have the capability to do that because you don't have the time to do it, or you don't have the tools to do it, well, we live in an age also where tools are plentiful. They're online, they're free. And we live also in an age where we can connect with others, both in, I would suggest highly, to do so in person if you can. But I would also say that if you can't, it's okay to do it virtually.
I love that. Self-care is free. It's true. Just taking a few minutes to pause, accept yourself, love yourself, walk on the beach, go in the woods. It's free. Take a deep breath, free air.
Yeah, at least for now, anyway.
Well, the time has absolutely flown by, so thank you so much, Shelly Tygielski, for coming on to the show, author of Sit Down to Rise Up, How Radical Self-Care Can Change the World. But I do have to finish by asking the question I ask all of my guests, which is, what do you wish everyone knew about love?
I wish that everybody knew that it was the superpower that each of us possesses, and that we're all a character in a comic book that can absolutely change the world around us, that area of the garden that we can reach if we just will it and if we lean into that superpower.
I love that. We are all superheroes, empowered by love, here to save the world.
I personally am probably a Care Bear, but yes, a superhero as
well. Well, Care Bear's a superhero. I mean,
I know, totally.
So. Amazing. So thanks again, Shelly Tygielski, for coming onto the show. For our listeners that want to learn more about you, how can they find you?
I'm most active on my Instagram account, which is Mindful Skater Girl. Mindful Skater Girl. And because my name is impossible to spell, and pronounce. But you can also find me on my website, shellytygielski.com. And there's a ton of resources there as well. And if you just Google my name, Shelly, Shelly, and the first three letters of my last name, Tyg, it will pull up. You don't have to spell the whole thing.
Wonderful. So is it snowboarding in the winter and skating in the summer?
Yeah, pretty much.
Nice. Wonderful. Well, thanks again so much for coming onto the show, for reminding us all to take care of ourselves, to find the community that helps us feel not so alone in what it is that we're going through. And this is true radical self-care.
Thank you so much for having me, Zach. I really appreciate it.
And thank you, listeners, so much for listening. I hope you remember all of the valuable lessons that Shelly shared with us today, including it's important to give ourselves breaks, yoga snacks, if you will, to stretch or walk outside or simply breathe mindfully for a few minutes. Along with many practices throughout the day, in the morning, we can practice RPM, rise, P, meditate. It's important to have a non-negotiable practice in the morning. And remember, self-care is communal care. Self-care can mean leaning on community and asking for the help that you need. Burnout is an actual disease that is plaguing many of us. Fortunately, self-care doesn't cost money. Self-care is free. And love is a superpower that each of us possesses. And don't forget, you are perfect just the way you are. You are lovable, loving, and loved.
Thanks again for listening to the Learn to Love podcast. To learn more about the show and your host, head over to zachbeach.com or theheartcenter.com. You can also follow Zach on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.